Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Graying Jedi podcast. It is I, Urza Master, joining me as always, Lord Uther and Jedi Master Cilium Maz. Gentlemen, welcome back to the Jedi Council chambers. After a brief spell away, we return, not for us 1 year later, but for Cassian Andor and the plucky crew of Andor 1 year later. Season 2, Arc 1, as this season is dropping in 3-episode arcs as we go through it. Gentlemen, this is going to be the final season of Andor. They've announced this, and so they're giving us big chunks of the story of the rebellion. I don't want to take too much away, but Jedi Master Cilium, give us a little background here on this leap into 1 year later of Andor.
We might be having transmission problems from the surface.
Transmission problems can only indicate one thing: invasion. Well, I'll jump into the background here. Cassian Andor, 1 year later, Lord Uther, as we wait for Jedi Master Cilium to rejoin us in the council chambers, our favorite rebel spy has basically jumped full throttle into this rebellion thing. He's out on a mission while his compatriots are on this sort of hideaway planet harvesting grain. And of course, Cassian is stealing a ship and hasn't really been taught to drive it. What did you think about this first episode in particular?
Well, to give to me, an umbrella view of it in a sense, or at least of one certain character, I sent you guys a message saying that, Pedro Pascal, rightfully so, gets a lot of, he's been just getting all these different roles, maybe coming off of Game of Thrones, his appearance there, and I'm sure he did things before that, but how I don't see Diego Luna in more movies or TV series, I don't know, because he really reels you in with his superb acting, gets you to buy into his character and what they're doing 100%. I love the idea, he's like the smooth talker who always has a plan. And what I really liked when he was trying to steal that TIE fighter was him playing on more, to me, it felt like emotion at least, than anything else. And so he plays into that emotion piece, and then he tries to get in that TIE fighter. And I kind of liked that he couldn't just fly it right off the bat, because I think he said later on that he was trained in a different type of TIE fighter or something like that. Yeah,
it wasn't what he was trained in.
Yeah. Kind of reminiscent of Rey trying to fly the Falcon a little bit. I don't know if that's what they were going for there. I'm keeping my fingers crossed that it wasn't, but anyway.
I'm just glad.
Yeah, no, it was.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a great scene. And I just, again, I feel like he doesn't have to carry this series because the acting is so good overall. Mm-hmm. But it's very evident, that he's that lead guy there, that you're following along with what he does, and you're buying into it 100%.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's one of those things that Star Wars often ignores, and this is what I love about Trek, of course. If y'all here are subscribed to Pending Rebrand, you're probably a fan of our Warp Core podcast. What I think Star Trek has always done well is show that human aspect of not everything always goes to plan. I mean, it can be, and I think we get that here with Cassian at this experimental base. You get this very carefully, well-laid plan. It seems calm, cool, collected. The nervous component plays out just right, just so, and it seems like it's going to go off without a hitch. And then it goes disastrously wrong. Comedically speaking, it's wonderful. It's very funny. But you get that level of intensity, and that's something that, in Trek, they might not get out of a situation unscathed. I mean, generally speaking, you kind of know episode to episode it's going to be a happy ending, with the exception of maybe, I don't know, a Tar Beast killing Tasha Yar, which, why that's not a happy ending, I don't know. But, you really felt it, I think, in this episode. Is like there's frustration, there's survival instinct, fight or flight kicks in. and it really does become fight before flight, and even at that, it's haphazard, which is just this whole idea of this birth of a rebellion, which I think is so beautifully shown here. You get this in this first arc. Is he, and just strictly speaking about Cassian, I know we have other characters to get to too, but he barely escapes this base, can barely fly himself out of there. He's upside down for weeks, can't figure out how to get around. Crash lands essentially in this, meetup spot where another rebel faction, who is about as dim-witted as they come, basically end up warring over each other because they can't figure out who's going to lead them now that their leader's gone. Which, I mean, if ever there was a great story of rebellion, I mean, this is like the space slash sort of funny version of the wind that shakes the barley in a way. You've got these ideologues who probably have the best of intentions, but there's a lot of testosterone flying around the room. There's a lot of like holier than thou or more macho than thou going on, and they have an agenda. They know they want this ship, but they're hungry. They have all these human needs, and they're also literally being hunted by a beast that they have not yet seen, cannot name, and kind of vacillate in between of we're so deliriously thirsty and hungry, we're acutely aware of kind of the crap we're in, and we've got this pilot. We don't know if he's Imperial, we don't know if he's Rebel. He says he's Rebel, but how do we know? Which actually feeds us into Arc 2, because as we come to find out, the Empire is very good at spreading false information. So it's, if ever there was all of these things from the original trilogy that you didn't get, because we see the Rebel Alliance, it's an alliance, and it's well-founded, well-established, well-run, it's oiled, and it's really successful. And you kind of see these sort of, kind of doofus stormtroopers who bang their heads on door openings, and they're scary and imposing, but they can't hit the broadside of a barn, and like these scrappy kids can get away from them. There's a real like table turn here that I'm glad we're seeing the roots of this, because it makes for great storytelling, and it actually sort of starts to complete that picture of the rebellion that we get through Rogue One with. So, putting a pin in Cassian Andor, let's talk about his friends, the survivors who are on this crop planet, because I think this is a lot more interesting than maybe on the surface it appears to be. So, what did you think about Bix and company, on this wheat world?
Well, obviously they're, we know that they're hiding away. We get to see how broken Bix is, which obviously is, I think something's going to happen down the line here, so we'll try to be careful with some of those spoiler alerts or making some predictions. But we get to see that, and I might be combining some episodes together here, because watching the last three throw me off a little bit time wise. Mm-hmm. But the rawness of the assault that winds up happening on her, mm-hmm. and probably stirring up those feelings from when she was being interrogated, just kind of adding on to that. She may look weak, but she's probably one of the strongest ones out of all of them to even be able to function after all those things that she went through. I also we're seeing, I think, the breadth of the Empire, like the width of it, like how large it was. Mm-hmm. And I think in the movies, and understandably so, I always just thought it was this one main force that was hopping here, there, and everywhere, just like the Alliance. But that's the beauty of this, is we see how large this truly was, right? They're
right.
using entire planets to take their grain to feed their, to try and feed this the massive army that they have. And I think that's a very interesting aspect as well, right? So all those little things that seem to click, and we talked about this with the first season, getting all those. You would think that what's going on behind that door really isn't a big deal, because you want to see TIE fighters and X-Wings fighting each other. But they do such an amazing job of making you care about the little intricacies that have to be in place to make something like this massive empire happen. And I
Hmm.
do also like that things don't go to according to plan for the rebels.
Yeah.
That it becomes a mess, because I'm sure it's a mess. We see the, and I know I'm all over the place here, so I'll just give you things to kind of grab out of the air. And then we see the ruthlessness of Luthen and how he can be too. But he has to be, right? Like he said at some point, I believe he said the idea of being all in, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And you sacrifice everything for the greater good. And that's, I think that's easy to say, and here we see that's very easy to do.
And I think that's a great segue because we haven't yet talked about Mon Mothma, which this arc is really about her and her real quick descent, I would say, into this rebel life. Because I think the whole picture we're getting painted in this is exposing a lot of her, maybe not as on the nose as we're seeing with Cassian or Bix or even Luthen to a certain extent. I still think Luthen is a bit of an enigma in this first arc and continues to be, and we'll get into that in the next episode. But I think that Mon Mothma's daughter going through this 3-day wedding, over a weekend with all these rituals, and you see all these things, and she's sort of almost in a nostalgic delight at times. And then as things progress, she's kind of waxing and waning between we have to do this now, there's this ceremony, there's all these rituals established, but in the background there's Luthen, there's Tay, who's things are fraying with this childhood friend who's basically saved her butt in the first season, and now he's suffering the ill effects. And because of what's happened in his personal life, the Empire is becoming quite attractive to him, because now all of a sudden these evil friends could actually be very helpful for him. And he finds himself in a precarious situation where it's like, look, either Mon Mothma's got to help me, or I'm going to have to turn coat and seek out an alternative route, and that becomes a direct threat. And of course, Luthen sees this a mile away, and he knows what needs to be done. And Mon Mothma is kind of in this still state of denial from season one, where she can play both sides and try and preserve those who may be swept up versus those who are really in it. And I think she's sort of deluded herself that, like, you're either in it or you're not in it. And Luthen recognizes this and sees this as, like, if you're going to play both sides, you have to play it sort of ruthlessly. Now, I think that of course transforms in the next arc, but in this particular situation, she's really trying to connect with her daughter and say, like, you don't have to go down this path. You don't have to make this deal. You can be your own person. You can do your own things. But her daughter is bought in. She's hook, line, and sinker. She's like, no, this is tradition. This is I'm marrying myself to what needs to be done in her eyes for the greater good. And I think that what Mon goes through is seeing that she was in that same place. And that's, that whole dance scene is her having a mental breakdown at the end of that episode. And at the end of this arc is that she's realizing that, one, her childhood friend's got to go. And I think you alluded to this earlier. I think we have another character who's headed down the same path. And of course, we get the sister's girlfriend who shows up at the end, and she knows what's about to happen, and Luthen knows, and Luthen even says to Mon Mothma at one point, like, how nice for you that you can remain in ignorance. It's not going to last, and it doesn't. And Mon, I think, starts to realize in that moment that, like, she's got to start playing a little more Luthen. She's got to start picking a side here. She's sat on the benches, so to speak, for too long. Being a financier and trying to keep things moving in this direction against the Empire, but not really taking any bold or truly risky steps. And now she's kind of in it, and she's got to make that commitment, or, of course, get swept up like her friend Tay. And that's really for me, I think one of the more potent aspects of this arc is that you've got a character that I think we all want to we all want to look at the rebellion from that original trilogy side and say, there's purely good versus purely evil. Rebellion versus empire. Good versus evil, white hats versus black hats. And it's just not true. This series, the beauty of it, and I think Mon Mothma and Luthen really are the two characters that I look at. And I know it's called Andor, by the way, but these are the two characters that I look at that paint this picture so perfectly that there is no pure good or evil here. There is the greater good, and there is the greater evil. Because, and we've talked about this before on the podcast, the Empire worked for a lot of people. That's why the Empire comes back later on, or vestiges of it. And there's a lot of people it really didn't work for. The people on this agrarian planet who are happy farmers. I mean, all things considered, they have meals together, they work together, they harvest. They're obviously, they have a purpose in life, right? They're serving a greater good in a sense that they have to feed people, and they can take pride in that. I think, shout out to actual farmers in real life. Like, the toil of farming is not necessarily always glorious, but like they have those signs that you might see in agrarian or rural United States that say, hey, thank a farmer. You should thank a farmer. These people go out there and they toil their lives away so that you can eat. I don't know about you, but I grew up around farmers. I got family who farm, and I look at these folks in the Star Wars story here, and I go, that's corporate farming. That's the big corporation coming in to audit your farm to make sure everything's up to spec. It's not ye old farming or hobby farming. This is serious business. And these people, they work their butts off, and some Jimbo in a uniform can come in and kind of, I hate to simplify this, but can kind of assert his will, so to speak. And that's gross. And I was very tense at that scene. I'm glad it ended the way it did because the guy got what he deserved. But there's a lot to this that's just, it's shades of gray, and there's darker shades that crop up on both sides, and we'll get into that in the next arc for sure. But we have yet to touch on, and I don't mean to cut you off there, Lord Uther, I know you've got a thought there, but we have yet to touch on the actual Empire. And I want to get your thoughts on that. But go ahead, I'll let you take that from there.
If I may, gentlemen.
Jedi Master Cilia Maz is back with us from the Void.
From the Void, no less. There is a communications breakdown. I was not trained on this equipment, and I'm going to speak to Clea and Luthen as soon as I get returned to Coruscant. Gentlemen, some brief thoughts, not to go over past ground, but with future ground. We were talking about evil empires. We really need to talk about damaged relationships. And I'm, of course, speaking of Cyril and Dedra, whom we last saw in Season 1 on Ferrix. Dedra wanted nothing to do with her creepy stalker crush, but he did save her from an angry mob when a riot broke out on Rick's Road. And as it turns out now, they're cohabitating and living in sin. And this episode, thanks to series showrunner, creator Tony Gilroy, who was the writer on the first 3 episodes of this arc, we get the dinner from hell, where Dedra and Cyril welcome Edie, Cyril's overbearing, overprotective, overcritical mother. And what a delight that was to contrast against some of the grimmer aspects of this arc with Tay's betrayal and Andor's captivity and so forth. Just an absolutely phenomenal scene between Dedra and Edie, when basically the dating partner lays down the rules for the future in-law. And it's so fantastic to see Edie put in her place, because we see her berating Cyril all through the dinner as they try to make their way through some sort of Star Wars fondue. And then how she mashes that cake that they're serving for dessert, this lovely latticed little cake, and she's just smashing it down with her fork and flinging it off the plate, and you can just feel the teeth grinding from Dedra as she's like, all right, this ends right now. Love that moment. Contrast that with Dedra and her fellow officers meeting with Director Orson Krennic. Now, what's fascinating to me is the need for secrecy. As he says, if your superiors or coworkers are not in this room, they are not cleared for this project. The project, of course, he's referring to is the Death Star, but they don't know that. They're still lying to their own people about what they're up to, and the Emperor is promising energy independence. And so, as a result, they're setting off this season-long arc to take a rare mineral chalcolite from the planet, unsuspecting planet of Gorman. And they want to map out strategies to how to extract this precious mineral and possibly threaten the entire planet for their nefarious needs. But I think it's fascinating how even Krennic, he's giving them a load of bull, and they're swallowing it because of the top secrecy of the Death Star project, Project Starlight, which very few people are still in the know here 4 years out from Rogue One. So I think it's fascinating how, they're subterfuge and don't put this in your calendars and don't tell no one, and they still don't really know what they're working on. Gentlemen, we've talked about how this show is a contrast to, let's say, Skeleton Crew and The Mandalorian and the Book of Boba Fett and Obi-Wan Kenobi, and how it plumbs dark, mature themes and sides of the rebellion and the Empire that we don't get to see. I don't know if you agree with me or not. I hope we could find some consensus. I literally could watch an entire spin-off show of the Empire and their conference rooms and their meetings and their plots. It's some of the most fascinating political, office politics, espionage. I would follow Dedra, for example, as a woman trying to make her way in the Empire, in this bureaucracy and this, all of that. I would watch that show. They would not spend $120 million a season to make it, but I would watch that show in a heartbeat. These are some of the best written and exchanges between, co-workers trying to stab each other in the back, and you have Major Pendergrass, leading the discussion and slinging praise and criticism, withering criticism. And this goes all the way back to the first season. These are some of my favorite moments of Tony Gilroy's dialogue and the show in general. And it has nothing to do, as you say, with TIE fighters and X-Wings and the like. So they really capture that the Empire, from the original trilogy's version of battleships and fleets and stormtroopers marching through the streets. Here it's turn in your reports. We've had actionable intelligence. Why can't we make sense of it? Listen to these propaganda things we're going to plant in the press to try and spread ill will of Gorman before we move in and conquer the planet. Just some really, really, really good stuff there. We mentioned the wedding. Just a heartbreaking moment with the daughter Lita and Mon. I don't like the coldness with Lita and Perrin to Mon Mothma, and we've seen her in Rogue One. We've seen her in Return of the Jedi. If you've read the books and so forth, when she ultimately takes the stand as the face of the rebellion and becomes the de facto leader against Palpatine and his forces, she stands alone. There are no references to her marriage. There are no references to her family. So the assumption is that while she may survive physically, it's at such great cost, right? Everything that we're seeing now, her privileged life on Coruscant, her standing in the Senate, all of that has to be abandoned for the cause. And so that's a tragedy in and of itself. We don't know exactly how that will play out, or if we'll even get to see that on camera. I suspect that there will be some sort of break between either her and her husband, or maybe they bring Lita back. But she'll have to give all of that up in order to become the Mon Mothma that we see in Rogue One and so forth. So, I mean, you have that sort of Damocles hanging over her storyline. The betrayal of Tay is it's heartbreaking, because in the first season he was nothing but a supportive ally. He's the one who came up with the creative financing with this Chandrillian, I don't want to call him a smuggler, but he's definitely a guy that doesn't mind hosting Imperials at his residence and clearly is not pro-rebellion. But he's the one who's helping Mon fund this quote-unquote foundation, which is actually just money laundering to give to Luthen and the rebels. So in the first season, Tay is an ally. And then here, as Jedi Master Urza Master says, I mean, the rebels are actually bad for business for him now. You know, forget the fact that his wife left him and he can't hold his booze. I mean, this guy is flailing. And so, again, what's his key out is that he could possibly tell Skolden what's really the money going for, and then that would bring the whole house of cards down. So that was pretty extraordinary. When Cassian comes to the rescue in the third episode and saves Wilmon. I don't know if everyone remembers, Wilmon was the son. In season 1, his father ran the shop on Ferrix where Bix was using the communicator to speak to Luthen. He was kind of a bit player. We didn't really spend much time with him, but he's getting a much bigger presence in season 2. Wilmon Brasso, we remember from Ferrix, and of course B2EMO, who still pines for his master. Obviously, he doesn't have Marva anymore to plug him in at nights, but still hoping to see Cassian. And how heartbreaking is it when Cassian and Bix and Wilmon flee in the stolen TIE Avenger? Brasso's dead. Their cover was blown on Mina Rao, and they had to leave B2EMO behind. Probably for good. Like, I don't think Cassian's swinging back to that planet anytime soon to retrieve his droid buddy. And so they don't ever even get to have a reunion moment in this arc. And that tore me up on there, as I realized.
That was tough.
Yes, it's like this little droid. I mean, he's like your favorite dog, your favorite pet, and all he wants to do is be with, you know, the humans that he's bonded with, and he doesn't even get to say goodbye to Cassian proper. So that really tore me up there. The director of these first 3, and actually the first 6 episodes of these, was Ariel Kleiman. He's an Australian director. He's only had 1 or 2 features, nothing that was playing stateswide. He did do an episode of Showtime's Yellow Jackets. So he's kind of an unknown commodity overall. He just has a few credits. He graduated from film school in 2010. But his control of pacing in these first 3, these first 6 episodes, very sharp, able to contrast the lightness of Cyril and Dedra's dinner party with the horrors of Bix being assaulted by the Imperial officer, the wedding, the plans back on Coruscant in the conference room. All of this together, again, direction can be great when you notice it, and that's something like an auteur like Spike Lee or David Fincher or James Cameron might show you. And direction can be great when you don't notice it. And in this case, there's nothing that Kleiman does to get in the way of the story and your feeling of the story. And so that's really good direction too, when you can just take a step back and just let the events play out, the dialogue play out, the music. The editing is fantastic from Tony's brother John. All of the technical aspects of these episodes. I mean, the rumor was they spent $645 million on these 2 seasons, and while that number is disputed, they didn't really go on the cheap edges either. I mean, again, we're looking at big budget effects and big budget production design, and they're out in wheat fields. This isn't like, oh yeah, we just shot that in front of a green screen. I mean, they're out there in locations. Chandrilla is clearly, you know, a physical place, and they have all these elaborate sets. So, again, it's a shame we're only going to be getting a couple of seasons, but I think Star Wars fans in general, and this Jedi Council specifically, realizes that, you know, what we're seeing is something special here. It's an outlier, to be sure, because as we said, the Star Wars universe is big and broad and can hold things like Mandalorian and Skeleton Crew and Obi-Wan and Ahsoka. But this particular chapter, it's just riveting television. And I don't know if awards will come or if we're, you know, too soon to be discussing such things, but there's a lot of people doing a lot of good work. And I hope that that's kind of remembered down the road here, and it's not just some strange footnote. Oh, they did a prequel to a prequel, and it was on streaming. Like that would be really callous to just dismiss what this show is doing and showing us what is possible.
Absolutely. I think it would be a disservice to the Star Wars universe, so to speak, if we didn't get recognition for this story. I think it paints a fuller, more complete picture and helps justify some of the complexity they've added to later Star Wars, both the movies, the shows, and everything. Because the original trilogy, for as amazing as it is, and we all love it, it's all amazing. It is very black and white. It is. There are very few shades of gray, other than maybe Han Solo, Jabba the Hutt. That might be about as gray as it gets, and it's not terribly gray. This is a much more human. It takes it from science fiction romanticism to a science fiction realism, and that is, I think, where Star Trek has really always been more of that realistic picture, and that's why I think there was such a high level of respect between those two franchise creators, is because you do need some romantic aspect to be successful. And I think that's why Star Wars was and remains as popular as ever, is because it is idealistic. But there's so much that goes into what we saw there. This is giving us that, and that's potent. And it's doing it incredibly well. I agree, the pacing, the direction, the scenery, I mean, it's all very, very well done. More so than you'd expect, I think, even from a Star Wars production for a streaming series. So certainly I think it needs some accolades. But Lord Uther, what did you think? I'll let you give us the final thoughts here on this arc. What were your thoughts on some of the more imperial aspects of this arc, and what did you think of these first 3 episodes?
I just think the the ending with the music and the dancing is perfect, right? Because I think it shows that we're working up to like this fevered pitch, and that's something that's going to happen. And so I just think the way that music was playing, and having Mon dancing the way she was, I think that's showing us what's to come, in a sense, that it's just going to be this crazy, intense ride the rest of the way. I also think we're at that point where characters are going to start getting picked off, like we saw, right? Just very slowly, here and there, we're going to start losing those characters, because I've been thinking a lot about Rogue One. I was going to go back and watch it last night, but I'm an old man and fell asleep early, so I didn't get a chance to do that, because I'm just curious to, and maybe that's something we do when we're done watching Andor, is do a Rogue, maybe that should be our next podcast of a movie, should be Rogue One, so we can kind of tie it all together and see how Cassian has grown, or see how Diego Luna has played that character. And to Jedi Master Silly Moss's point, I would love to see a series of, after the Battle of Endor, or after Return of the Jedi, how do you transition all those Imperial people out, even though we kind of have a little hint of that in The Mandalorian, but how do you transition them out, install the Rebel Alliance, or the New Republic in, because you have to, again, this is so much deeper than the Death Star, second Death Star blows up, and all of a sudden the Rebels are in control. And that's what we've seen here in some of these series, which I think is what makes them so excellent. And maybe as Star Wars fans, we never really thought about that before, that there are intricacies and there's, the little things add up to a lot. And we've really been given an inside look to that with some of these series. So, if I was to rate this, it definitely gets a green Kyber crystal for me. I don't have anything green right now, otherwise I would project. I have a lot of green things, actually. Here, I got Celtics jersey. There we go. So, green for that. Just Cassian Andor, Diego Luna is a treasure, and we should just let everyone acknowledge it.
Oh, yeah. It's green Kyber crystal for me as well. Exactly that. It gives us all of that, I love that expression, little things add up to big things. And it presents it in that very real human way where we all know where this is going. And that's the thing, is you can't really hide it. We all know there's going to be a Death Star. There's going to be a Rebel alliance. And right now we don't even have a Rebel alliance. We have rebels, some of whom would rather kill each other over a rotting coconut and a possibility that a ship might be able to get them out of somewhere than, work towards upending an empire, because it seems so unfathomable. The reach of the empire just happens so quickly. I also think it'd be interesting to see how that all happened, like the conversion from the Galactic Republic to the Empire at the end of Episode 3. Now, granted, a lot of that is just literally like painting on a new sign, right? But I'd love to see, how did they make that transition from, well, this is the way the Republic does it, to this is the Empire, you have to obey or you get sent off to the Gulag. I'd love to see that. I'd love to see that, descent into evil. Maybe that's not as entertaining for some folks. It's kind of that Heart of Darkness situation, but I think it would be very entertaining.
And just a quick point, there probably were a lot of people that it's like when you get a new boss, right? I can keep working the station and counting the widgets that come through here. It's just for a different boss now, right? Mm-hmm. What's that song? Same, here's the new boss, same as the old boss. So you probably had people that went from the Empire or from the Republic to the Empire back to the New Republic. You know what I mean? Like, they probably saw 3 different governments transition before their eyes, which is my only slight issue with Star Wars. I know we're supposed to be giving our Kyber crystals, but I can't help myself. Maybe this is another episode. I do feel like the years are too compact. Even when, Vader turning into Vader, I felt like that was a longer time period that was happening, or at least him being in command or being Vader himself. But maybe there were some people that transitioned 3 different times into 3 different governments just sitting at a station. Yeah, so anyway.
Like Cyril at the Bureau of Imperial Standards. And we see that in the next episode where he starts taking the young intern around. I was sitting at a desk right over there. So that's very funny there. Gentlemen, I found something green in my nose, and so therefore that is my green Kyber crystal. It's rock hard, and it's a winner. So we're going to go with that for this first 3. My only disappointment is that because of the strikes that we had a couple of years ago, and because Tony Gilroy was not allowed to participate for 7-8 months, the show had to kind of do stuff without any American input, any Writers Guild input. These are the only 3 episodes that he officially will be credited with. Now, as the showrunner, I'm sure he had a hand in tweaking scripts down the road and so forth. So it's not like he just left the show. But these are the only 3 bearing his name. The next 3 are by Bo Willimon from the first season. The following 3 are from Dan Gilroy, his brother, from the first season. And we have a new writer this season, and he apparently is a huge Star Wars man. And we'll talk more about him when we get to that final arc. But apparently he was picked by Tony because he's the one who can tell you when Palpatine's birthday was and what's the exact weight of a tauntaun. And he wanted that writer to do the episodes that will lead us into Rogue One. So he said he wanted, quote, a Star Wars guy to be able to lay all that foundation into the movie, which we already know what has happened. Because, again, if there's one thing Mr. Gilroy has been consistent about, is that he really doesn't care about Jedi and empires and Death Stars and all of that. He's more interested, obviously, in the human complexities of it. But that being said, he knew enough to know that I need somebody here who could speak Huttese in his free time. And so we'll get a new writer for that last arc, and we'll talk more about Tom Bissell when we get there. But yes, absolute shimmering green for Mr. Gilroy. Even with this strange new format that we're getting, 3 episodes equal 1 year, takes a little bit of getting used to. We'll talk about that more in the second arc in our next episode. But strong stuff.
Yes, excellent first 3 drop for Andor Season 2. Stick with us here on the Graying Jedi podcast. Make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay up to date with all our wonderful shows here at Pending Rebrand. Don't forget our shorts. They'll hit your feed often and may give you a little bit of an edge throughout your day as you're waiting for the next drop from that galaxy far, far away. And until next time, when we get back in there, into that jump seat with Cassian Andor and hang upside down for weeks on end in space while we figure out each year leading into Rogue One, stick with us, Graying Jedi, Graying Sith, Graying Gray Jedi, and others, because we will be out there, the Force with us.